is you. Jeez.
Sure.
Okay.
Not the cat. Hi.
So
Hi, Vincent.
that's our cat, Vincent. Today is the second lecture of the Sydney Lecture Series, and I'll start by encouraging everybody to mute their microphones, and that will prevent us, especially Maureen and I, from having a problem. And then when you need to speak, of course, you need to remember to unmute your microphone. It should be the lower left-hand corner if you're on a laptop to do that. And so we have Adam Saffer and Aimei who are going to be talking to us about civil society and egocentric networks. So you should be seeing the slides if everything's working okay. And I'm going to just let them introduce themselves and sort of run it like it's their class. So there's information available online about them that I posted on the Facebook site. So if you have any questions, go ahead and go there or send them a message. So with that, I'll let them get started, and then I'm going to mute my microphone.
Okay, Aimei, you want to do your introduction?
Okay, sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Aimei. I'm an associate professor at University of Southern California. So my research is in the field of civil society, social network analysis, and what I call network management, strategic network management. So that's a new field where we combine social network analysis and perspectives with public relations research.
And my name is Adam Saffer. I'm currently at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, soon to be at the University of Minneapolis in the Twin Cities. My research has primarily been looking at interorganizational networks to understand the role of social capital and shared meaning in the context of public relations. But more recently, I've been exploring some other questions that are in PR adjacent fields like political communication and health communication that look at the ties that are activated whenever individuals have conversations about politics or health issues to understand how that influences their perceptions towards a message or their behavioral intentions like stopping smoking. So today, what we have, we're got a couple of learning objectives for this seminar. We're treating it kind of like a doctoral seminar, so we hope to have some engagement from you and some good conversation. To get us talking about the issues of civil society and egocentric networks, we're going to first introduce the network perspective and the fundamental concepts, and then we're going to apply some network theories and methods to questions about civil society and discussion networks. So Aimei is going to focus on a couple of studies that she has, a couple of publications, and then I'm going to talk about one of our recent collaborations. And then we're going to end by having a conversation about how network research can move public relations research forward. So here's our agenda. First, we're going to do some introductions. I think we have enough time to do just a quick introduction. Then we're going to talk about the network perspective, civil society, egocentric discussion networks, and then moving PR research forward. So just quickly, if we could just get everyone to unmute themselves and go around the room and say your name and university, I think that would be enough, just so we can make sure we can hear everyone. So Alvin, how about you start us off?
Oh, hi. I'm Alvin at University of Pennsylvania. Thank you.
Great.
And that's Vincent.
Vincent, yeah.
Very important.
Kim, do you want to go next?
Kim Johnston. I'm in the School of Advertising, Marketing and Public Relations at QUT Business School in Brisbane. My main area of research is engagement, community engagement, stakeholder engagement, employee engagement. I have been to Adam's seminar on network research when he visited University of New South Wales, and certainly network research is coming up a lot more in the research I have been doing. And what do I want to get out of this? I'm just here to learn from Adam and Aimei.
Great. All right, next up is Avril Gordon.
Oh, hello, my name's Avril Gordon. I'm running the public relations major here at AUT University in Auckland. And my research is in international public relations and particularly collaborative learning in virtual teams for large PR projects.
Great.
So I am here to find out how this works. I work with Petra and we're really excited about bringing this into our classroom.
Great. All right. Anna?
Hi, I'm Anna Kachigina. I'm at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, interested in engagement, civil society, and social capital. Thank you.
Shima?
Hi, I'm Shima, a PhD student at the University of New South Wales.
Grace, I think you're next.
Hi everyone, I'm Grace G. I'm currently assistant professor in Virginia Commonwealth University, and I will be soon working at Boston University after this semester. I'm very thrilled about this seminar. I messed up. I got the time wrong last time, so I didn't join it last time, the first time we had this. But fortunately, I finally got it right. So I have done some network analysis with Aimei before, and I worked on some other network analysis with other two scholars in corporate social responsibility.
Okay.
So my main area of research is social media-based engagement. So I'm willing to learn more from you, both of you. Thank you.
Lisa?
Hi, my name is Lisa. I am Kim's colleague at QUT. One of my research interests is public diplomacy, and I took a class on social network analysis when I was a PhD student at Purdue University, and I have completely forgotten how to use it. So I would like to learn whether I can still use it in my research, and what are the areas of research that I should be exploring using SMA. Thank you.
Great. There's one name that I can't pronounce. Aimei, do you want to?
No, I can't even see it.
Okay. Can you say your name again?
Chu King, I think it is.
Okay. Yeah, Chu King.
Hi.
Chu King?
Okay.
Yes.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, my name is Chu Ching Dong. I am a PhD student at the University of Minnesota.
Oh, great.
I usually do CSR research, and I'm pretty elementary in the network analysis, and I would like to learn more from the experts.
Yeah, hey, great to have you. Minnesota, all right. Well, I think that's everyone. If I've gotten everyone on this list, the names are just coming up top.
You skipped Bree. And
Oh, did I skip Bree? Oh my gosh, sorry.
Don't stress. Hi everyone, my name's Bree Hurst. I am a senior lecturer at QUT, so I work with Lisa and Kim. One of the projects I'm working on at the moment is looking at a very contentious mining project in Australia, and we have a lot of Twitter data, and I'm really interested to see how we can work out networks in amongst that. So it's a really, really cool project, but we are literally overwhelmed with data.
Oh, do you need a third author on that?
There's a few of us, but yeah, I'll send both of you an email. And
if you need a third author, I'm happy to.
Excellent, good to know.
And I think I'm the last person. Can I say hi?
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi. My name's Maureen Taylor. I am now at the University of Technology, Sydney, and connected to just about everybody on this call by probably at the most 2 degrees of separation.
Yeah.
And the last thing I'm going to say is that please look at the first one. When you go, this will be archived on YouTube. And I did the first one, and I'd love for anybody who's on this call who didn't make it to the first one to watch it as well. The whole goal is that Michael wants to create a series of PhD seminars. And if you didn't make the first one, you can still participate and still do the exercises and the discussion even without the rest of the people.
Yeah, it was great. And we are trying to build from that in our presentation here. So I watched that earlier. So we're going to continue the conversation, focus on public relations.
Great.
Great. All right. So to start off, we just want to lay the foundation of what a network perspective is. And if you are familiar or didn't notice, Aimei and I recently co-edited a special issue in Public Relations Review that was titled Embracing the Network Paradigm, New Directions in Public Relations Research. This had a great collection of articles. Some of the authors are on the call, like Alvin. So we encourage you to check that out. In our editor's note, what we tried to do is really kind of lay out what the network perspective could do for public relations research. We broke down the different levels of analysis, some of the key assumptions of doing network research, and then highlighted the contributions that each of the articles in our special issue made. So one of the things that we have picked up on from conversations with our students, with other researchers, and just comments at different conferences is that people really have this myth that in order to do network research that you have to know network analysis. And so what we want to start the presentation or discussion with is just laying out the assumption that network research is not just a method. Network research really is the network perspective, and it's broader than any single theory for explaining a social phenomenon. It's really a way of orienting yourself to the social sciences to recognize that individuals, organizations, actors are not alone. They are connected, and those connections have an influence on how they behave. So a network perspective is really kind of that big picture looking at the social world as not just a bunch of actors that are isolated, but ones that are really embedded in webs of relationships. So with the network perspective, there are multiple network theories, right? And I have theory in quotation mark here because network theory is really a several theories or a collection of theories that focus on the connections and how those connections have an influence or lead to some kind of outcome for actors or for individuals. And then network analysis is going to be the analytical tool for studying relational data, right? So relational data are going to be data sets where you have a connection or a way of identifying how actors in your data set are connected. So these are kind of the three things for getting familiar with network research, just to separate out. So some of the assumptions with a social network perspective is that relationships are the primary unit of analysis, right? So traditional social science research does not recognize relationships as the primary unit of analysis. Usually it's individuals if it's a survey, or it could be content if you're doing a content analysis. What network analysis does is it says, those individuals or those artifacts that are being studied have connections to others. And so the relationship becomes the primary unit of analysis. It doesn't disregard the artifact or the individual. It really looks to see how they are connected. So with this perspective, you're violating the assumptions of independence that are inherent in traditional social science statistics. So it's necessary to use other analytical techniques. But still, the network theory can really help us answer some important questions in public relations that we think need to be addressed still. So while we're saying that you're violating these assumptions with network analysis in terms of the statistics, we want you to know that you can still use network theory to really understand some pretty important questions in the field. So what I thought with that quick introduction there of the social network perspective is that we would start with a couple of questions here about networks. And then I have some slides based on where the conversation goes, just to kind of clarify a few things. So I thought that maybe we could start by answering the question of what are communication networks, right? So what is a communication network? How would you define it?
Can I answer?
Sure, go ahead.
So in my mind, a communication network is in any kind of social relationships where actors have a actors are connected by a communicative action. So you may be tweeting, and that's communication. You may be talking to each other, that's communication. And what we're doing today, right now, is a form of communication network.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Other definitions?
I think network is composed of the actors and the relationship between them. And within communication network, when we talk about the relationship between two actors, it's usually a communicative activities like retreats or actual communication or labor services, like all kinds of communicative activities.
Okay. Others?
It is a set of, sorry.
Go ahead.
It is a set of nodes or actors and relationships that link those actors or nodes to each other?
I think it is also the potential. So it's the the communication network doesn't necessarily need to be communicating at that particular time. It's the potential for communication or the need for to have that strength of tie and that relationship, communicative relationship for a particular purpose or topic or around a sentiment.
Good. Others? Okay, I'm gonna build on what Kim said there, because she's drawing off an important point, or she's making an important point that I want to get across here. Whenever we are defining communication networks, we often fall back to our assumptions about what is communication, right? Or like the previous lecture discussed, what is public relations? And Kim, I recall your answer being something about the capacity to communicate. It wasn't just the state, that there could be a potential for communicating. So whenever we are thinking about a communication network, it's really important to recognize our assumptions that are inherent in our definition of communication. So one of the assumptions that a lot of people make with communication networks is that it's transactional, and it goes back to the transmission models of communication, where a sender sends a message and it is received by somebody else. And that transmission creates a connection between two different individuals. So this is really what Peter Monge and Nashir Contractor were talking about whenever they defined communication networks as the patterns of contact between communication partners that are created by transmitting and exchanging messages through space and time. Now, one of the definitions that I like of communication networks come from the work of Michelle Shumate and her graduate students, where they stated that communication networks are relations among various types of nodes that illustrate the ways in which messages are transmitted and interpreted. So my approach to public relations, the way that I define public relations, drawing from the work of Maureen and Carl Botan, is I see PR as being about the negotiation of relationships and shared meaning. So how I approach communication networks is to recognize that individuals can be embedded in webs of relationships. Organizations can be embedded in webs of relationships that also have this surrounding of the stories that are being told. The communication that's being shared among them is creating this other layer that goes beyond just whether they have a connection, that goes beyond just whether they exchanged a message between each other. So for me, I really like this definition that Michelle and then put forth about communication networks being about the interpretation. Because sometimes networks are not merely an exchange, they might be representational. So there might not be communication or an actual exchange of a message that takes place. And an example of this would be websites. Websites that are hyperlinked, those are representational networks, because there is a hyperlink that goes from one website to another. There's not actual communication that's taking place between those. There's just an association. So with saying that, can people think of more ways that we could define a communication network for public relations?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. Is there any other way, like having considered communication networks as being about the interpretation too, and about the assumptions of communication, what are some other ways that we could define what a communication network is?
I have an example. Also can be responded to the second question. Like some of my colleagues' work have been looking at different websites, different media outlets. They have shared publics. For example, maybe like CNN and Fox News have less shared audiences, and CNN and the New York Times will have more shared audiences. So those can be considered communication, but it's mostly like a readership, a kind of like an affiliation tie. So it's not really a message. It's also like represent, I think.
Okay. How about we do this? How about we come up with examples of networks in your own area of research? So thinking about your own research, whatever you study, if you study websites, if you study social media posts, if you study activist groups, that could be your nodes. And then think about how those nodes or those actors are connected, right? So Alvin, you were kind of getting an example there. While you share your example of a network in your own research area, maybe others can be writing down what nodes and connections there are. So do you want to go, Alvin?
Do you want me to give an example, right?
Yeah.
Well, nodes and networks and relationships they can be found pretty much anywhere. Mm-hmm. Just recently, the article I read from you and Dr. Morehouse at that case, it's about engagement and the networks of engagement among the authors, basically who wrote and who writes about engagement and how they define and where their whole theorization come from. One way to look at their network by citations, different communities they organize. Social network is a big thing. I mean, everything is connected over there some way, and it's definitely interpretive. I think, well, we can also come back to the offline world, which is a little bit more challenging, but different activists, how events maybe form connections in the city, how, you know, how those nodes help people to get together and build communities, build understandings, build stories everywhere, multiple cases. Thank you.
Yeah. Someone else for an example of networks in your own research area?
In my research, I have focused on one student activist group, and I'm interested in how this activist group is linked to other activist groups or other student groups or other organizations. And the link between these groups can be organizing shared events or following each other or co-create posts on social media.
Okay. Yeah. So the connections there would be the posts on social media? Would it be mentions of other accounts, or how would?
Yes. There can be many relationships between these groups, but I think the most important one is having the same goal and also finding each other to organize same events or attending same events.
Okay, yeah, good.
And
other examples?
Adam, I would also add, I think implied in what you've said, and it's part of networks anyway, just that there is a difference between our sort of voluntary networks and our work networks, our non-voluntary networks, and we treat them differently and behave differently in them. So that makes a difference depending on what we looked at.
Yeah, work networks. Other examples?
Adam, Bree and I are working on a GP engagement project with a health service using a network approach, and we're defining the networks based on the outcome of that interaction and that relationship, whether or not it's actual or potential or conceived or known. But it's really about what is the outcome, what is the purpose of that, having that network for the benefit of the patient.
Okay, so the node in that network would be the patient, or what would it be?
The node would be, the GP, the area within the health service, the different business units within the health service, and the patient may not actually be a node in that case because it's the interaction for the benefit of the patient.
Okay, so there's an indirect connection there. So it might be two, and whenever you're saying GP, is that a general practitioner?
Yes.
Okay, so general practitioners in a hospital might be connected by their shared patient. So they have a patient that is the connection between them. So,
or the service that they need to deliver.
Yeah, or the service, yeah. So the service could be that they have a shared service that they provide within that hospital. So in that case, what we have going on here, and you're kind of getting at a point that I want to get across with network research, is whenever we talk about network research and we're defining nodes and how they are connected, there's kind of two approaches: whole approaches and egocentric approaches. So Aimei is going to talk about her whole network approach, and this is also referred to as a sociocentric approach. So using Kim's example with the general practitioners having connections, we have to bound a network, because whenever we're taking a sociocentric approach, we're studying all of the nodes within a network. And as a researcher, we need to bound and say, these are the nodes that belong to this network, and these are the nodes that don't belong. And so a hospital, gives us some boundaries of saying we're looking at all of the general practitioners specifically in this hospital, and they're connected by their shared services or by their shared patients, right? Another example of this, going off of the work that I've done with Jordan Morehouse, we wanted to see how all of the authors of engagement research and public relations were connected. So we bounded our network by looking at only people who had published in public relations journals and had studied engagement. And we defined the connections for the authors as if they co-authored together. And so the nodes in that network were the authors, and the connections was their co-authorship, and we bounded it by saying that they had to publish in specific journals and have a specific topic. The other approach that I'm going to talk about later is an egocentric approach. And this is where we aren't necessarily looking at all of the actors in a space. We are looking at one actor or a set of actors and how their immediate connections around them have influences on them. So it's not necessarily looking at how everybody's connected in a space, but more of each individual's network and looking at the patterns of the relationships that they have with multiple people. So a lot of the research in public relations has focused primarily on whole networks. This could be the work that looks at civil society actors, where you get all of the organizations within an alliance or a coalition and you study all of the relationships among them. It could be, like Bree, you gave the example of the Twitter data set that you have. It could be all of the tweets about that mining incident and the connections between the Twitter users. Could be whether they mentioned another Twitter user, or it could be that they use the same hashtag. So whenever you are coming up with a network research idea, a couple of key points that you want to keep in mind is, what are my nodes? How are they connected? And they can be connected in multiple ways. And am I looking at a whole network, or am I looking at personal networks or ego network research, right? So with that foundation, just looking at the time here, we're going to start to transition over to Aimei's discussion about civil society networks. But before we get into that, are there any questions about the fundamental parts here? None? Okay. They always teach us in the pedagogy classes to be patient with the time and be comfortable with the silence, but it's just a little bit different in an online environment. So I'm assuming there's no questions.
I know we may need to have you call on people, because it's hard to, you can't see everybody at the same time either, I assume.
Yeah. So are there any questions about nodes, connections, and the two approaches? Egocentric versus sociocentric? Okay, seeing none, Aimei, do you want to?
Yeah, so I would like to jump in. Can you stop sharing your screen so I can run the slides from my end?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you?
Yeah, I'm doing it. So can you guys see it?
Yeah.
Yes.
How can I maximize this?
Present.
Okay, awesome. So, sorry. Hi everyone. So again, this is Aimei. I wanted to kind of like start off by introducing you guys into this paradigm, what I call strategic network management. So I know there's a lot of experts on this panel, and you are all familiar with the idea that if you're managing a pair of relationship, and we know that's called relationship management. And in the traditional literature, we have seen a lot of study looking at how one organization manage relationship with one type of specific publics. But most of the times, organizations don't get to manage one type of relationship with one type of public at a time. Oftentimes, they are dealing with much more complex situation where they are managing networks of relationships. So what are you doing when you manage networks of relationships? Is that, just like a much more extended version of relationship management, or does that call for a different perspective? What do you think? Anyone?
I think it went back to Adam's point about in a network of relationships, nothing is independent from each other. So when we are interpreting the effect of a PR, for example, PR campaign, we can not only be thinking about like we want to establish a relationship with this community, but to recognize the fact that your PR campaign can also affect your other kinds of relationship with other kinds of communities. So it's just the interdependence between all kinds of actors. We should consider that.
Mm-hmm. Great. Anybody else?
Should we also?
Sorry. I think we should have a broader overview of the network here. It is not enough to know exactly who are our direct contacts, but also how different actors in the community are connected together. So again, we need to have a broader view of who is connected to who.
Yeah, excellent. Anna, you want to say something?
Yeah, I guess two more things to add over here is that it's not two-way anymore, right? So multiple actors and two-way doesn't hold truth here. And another thing I guess we also want to add here, and I don't know, maybe it's a point of discussion, is about the idea of power. Because in the organization center, the idea is that the organization has the power. The relationship building comes with the organization. But here, power is, everyone has power. Each node has a power, and the relationship itself, so each connection also has power. So I guess the idea of power should play a little bit differently in the network perspective.
Excellent. Completely agree. Anybody else? So yeah, so the point here is that when you're looking at one pair of a relationship, you're basically looking at it from a very much dyadic perspective, where you're looking at your relationship with that one group of public, and it's very much isolated view. But in social reality, what things actually happening is that a lot of times, a lot of different groups of publics are interrelated to each other, and how they react to your message, how they want to build relationship with you also depend on their relationship with each other. And at the same time, message doesn't go from sender to receiver and from receiver back to sender. Message travel through very complex networks. So without taking a look at the complex network, we are basically missing out a huge part of what is going on around organizational networks. And here is why I want to introduce a new perspective that is called strategic network management. So I want to encourage all of you to, stop thinking about relationship one at a time, or stop thinking about publics as isolated entities. Let's think of them as being placed in large networks, and think of networks as different types of resources or very critical tools that you can manage that will help you accomplish your organization's goals. So the strategic network management approach would consider social networks as a form of unique social resource. So that is something not only you can recognize its power, you can assess its structure, and you can also take on a range of network intervention approaches to change your network position. So by understanding what is your network, where you are in this network, and taking different approaches to address your network structure, you can change where you are in the network and even change your entire, at least your ego network structure, and that will have a much more lasting impact on, the community level or even societal level impact. So this is a new kind of paradigm, I think, that brings public relation to a new frontier where there are new theories to be developed, there are new concepts to be tested, and there are new ways of practice to be enact. So that's why I think this is really exciting. This is, a much sort of needed development in the profession overall. And it's being called for by the current time because now we're living in a network society where everybody is networked. If you look at something like coronavirus, it's happening in China, but the entire world is in this experience together. Nobody get to be like, that's not me, that's far away. We're all part of this large network. And for so long, testing and understanding network has been very difficult because studying network is a very complex process. But increasingly with the availability of big data, that problem has also become much easier and much more accessible. So there's fewer and fewer excuses for us to overlook network and more needs in both reality and the way our business are being conducted, our organizations are being operated, that need us to really embrace the network paradigm. So again, this is a call for all of you to kind of like join us and take a very closer look at the network management and strategic network approach. So in today's talk, I want to talk about two studies that kind of showcase the value of social network approach for organizations. So the first study look at social capital and how a civil society organization could build its own social capital and also enrich its immediate community. And another is a theoretical framework that connect social network analysis with social network perspective with issues management, and think about how those two different approaches are interrelated to each other. So the first study, as I was saying, is titled Building a Cross-Sectoral Interorganizational Network to Advance Nonprofits, NGO Incubator as Relationship Brokers in China. This is a study that based in China. So the economic restructuring in China has opened up so much opportunity for new organizations such as NGOs to come in and play a role in this, fast changing society. However, there's a lot of social sort of realities that also make it difficult for this type of organizations to develop. One example being that the government hold a very tight control of the social order and what you cannot do in China. So among Chinese NGOs, they have some very special kind of NGO that called Gongo. Basically, they are organized by the Chinese government. So even though they call themselves NGOs, but they actually have very close tie with the government, and a lot of times the leaders of those NGOs are appointed by the Chinese Communist Party. And then you have more like a Western style, so grassroots-based, citizen-run NGOs. And in addition to these type of NGOs, there are also a new type of distinctive NGOs emerging in China. And these are what we call NGO incubators. They are by nature network engineers. So why would I call them network engineers? Because they're basically burst to build networks. It is oftentimes in the mission to state that it is the mission of this NGO to provide training, to provide opportunity, and to facilitate the connections among civil society organizations. So right there in the mission, these are the kind of NGOs that are burst to build networks. So it's kind of fascinating to a network scholar to identify such a group of NGO that's in the job title. It's literally like, we're here to build networks. That's why I was really, really excited that I find this group of NGOs. So the NGO that I'm looking at, my colleague and I, what we're looking at here is the NGO called Aimei. It has been around for a while, but very rarely any academic research have looked at this type of NGO. Aimei is the largest incubator, Chinese NGO incubator in China. So we chose to focus on this one because I think by studying the Ego Network, it's actually an Ego Network study. I'm sorry, Adam, to kind of steal your thunder a little bit. But this, unique NGO, by looking at this very special case, we believe it can tell us so much about the potential benefit that NGO incubators can bring to the table. So that's what I was saying a little bit earlier. Aimei was founded in 2006, so it has been around for a long time. It has built connection with the Chinese government, some Chinese business-based foundations such as Narada Foundation and the Ford Foundation. Here I want to just spend a little bit time to talk about the Chinese business-based foundation. So a lot of people, when they think about Chinese business, they don't think about philanthropy or like the philanthropic culture, and they don't think that's a really big thing. And it was true for a very, very long time. But until the most recent, about 10 or 15 years, that situation has been changed. So that basically, as Chinese social businesses increasingly amass such a big amount of fortune, they also recognize the need for corporate social responsibility. So they looked around and asked themselves, what can we do to be socially responsible and stay out of trouble? Because there are a lot of forbidden areas in China you don't really want to touch. So the Chinese business oftentimes get together to form business-based foundation, and those foundations are growing fast in such a way that they become one of the most important funders for civil society organizations. So in China, if you're a civil society organization, you better not get funding from an international NGO or international foundation, because that oftentimes will raise the alarm of the Chinese government. You will look suspicious in the eyes of the government. So you don't want to do that. And there's very limited funding from the Chinese government because the Chinese government has this very dubious attitude towards civil society. They kind of want them to be there, but not too much. So they don't provide a lot of funding and grants. So where do you go if you are a Chinese NGO? Where do you go for this type of money? Increasingly, the Chinese business-led or business-based foundation provide a very desirable alternative. They have the resource, they are very resource-rich, and they don't raise the alarm of the Chinese government. And hence, that is going to play a very significant role in my study, as you will see. So Aimei, ever since its birth, it has been doing, things such as building different kind of networks, helping to connect different organizations together. And very importantly, it was able to connect government, some kind of government agency with Chinese business leaders and a little bit of international business, mostly international business, not international NGOs, together to wave and provide this kind of very much needed social network to help nurture this young Chinese civil society. And so by the time, which is 2016, when we conduct the study, Aimei has successfully incubated over 200 NGOs. So you think about like the fact that they started to operate in 2006, and by 2016, they have burst 200 other NGOs. That's crazy. That's a very successful number. And some of those NGOs are very, very well known in China, such as Chihuahua or One Kg More, which are which is a disaster relief NGO that played a huge role in 2008 Wenchuan earthquake. So there's challenges and opportunities. On the one hand, you have a country that's on the rise economically, and there's a lot of social problems that needs to be solved, and the Chinese civil society is very, very young and needs help, needs nurturing. And at the same time, there's a lot of very much gray and uncertain areas in China where the regulation is not very straightforward. And if you step in the wrong steps, you could end up, being sort of blacklisted by the government. But at the same time, a lot of those NGOs need resources, need help to continue to develop. So that's where, the background for this type of NGO come in. And to study this NGOs network building, we draw upon the structural hole theory, because clearly there's structural hole in this space. On the one hand, you have government that have a lot of social issues that they need to address, but they don't have all this capacity to address all the problems. On the other hand, you have the Chinese business with all the money and all the goodwill to help, but they don't know who they should fund. And in the other side, you have the Chinese civil society actors who are kind of poor, but have all this sort of maybe community connections or the knowledge to help, or at least the will to help. So you have a lot of structural holes in the space. But when we look at Bird's original theory, we thought the theory itself is very helpful in the sense that it identified the fact that when you have gaps in social connection that provide opportunity for civil actors to come in and provide some kind of bridging role. But at the same time, the theory is kind of evil in the sense that it argue if you bridge a structural hole, you're basically doing it to reap the benefit in the process. And the theory would even argue that you want to strategically bridge the hole for yourself and exclude some others from that kind of benefit. So we like part of the theory, but not the totality of the theory. So that's where in this study we made this argument that when you apply a theory such as structural hole theory into the context of the civil society, you need to reconsider some of the assumption of this basic theory to kind of like adapt the perspective to a much more communal based idea. So that's the idea such as public goods or the community benefit. So the idea is that sometimes maybe there are NGOs or organizations that are out there that are going to bridge those holes, not only for themselves, but also for others that are, in their community. So for instance, for organizations such as Aimei, when they are bridging those structural holes, they're not doing it for themselves per se. They're oftentimes doing it for other Chinese NGOs. So the end goal isn't their own benefit, but a much stronger and much more vibrant Chinese civil society. So that's the argument here. So that leads to some of our research questions, such as how did organization centrality in the Aimei's network change over time? How did the NGOs, organizations brokerage score in this network change over time? And how did this network community overall change over time? So we collect data in a very curious way. I hope this study design can provide some ideas for your research as well. So it's very hard to collect network data. In this case, because the organization we are looking at is a Chinese NGO, it sometimes also can be a challenge because some NGOs are not willing to speak or work with a researcher or a research team from the US, because that could raise the alarm of the Chinese government. Maybe the government will be asking, what are you doing? What are you saying? Can you share all the communication with us? So that's not exactly what they would do. I actually tried to reach out to the NGOs founder, and he declined to engage with me. So what do? I went to the online archive and find publicly available archives that the organization was able to keep. It was very comprehensive in the sense that every time whenever they had an event, they would list out the time and location of the event, why the event happened, and who was there during the event. And so we basically constructed a network based on the event data. So earlier you were asking, Adam was asking about like, how would you construct the network data? This will be an example. We extract all the archive data. Myself and my research assistant, we read through all the archives. We identify all the organizational names that are being mentioned in the archive, and every time they co-attended an event, that is considered a tie. Because if you, for instance, if I'm an NGO and you're an NGO, we're all part of an event, we probably would get to be introduced to each other. So when an NGO and a business both attended a fundraise, it is likely that the business will be introduced to this NGO. At least the NGO will try to introduce itself to the business. So that's what we're looking at here. We find indeed they're, very nice and pretty dense network being built around those organizations. We also sliced our networks into 3 periods in the hope that we can observe how the network maybe grow or change over time. So there are 3 periods of time from 2006 to 2011. And in terms of organizational types, we were able to identify Chinese national government agencies and Chinese local government and agencies, and Chinese business and Chinese nonprofit organizations, and a few international organizations. And then we considered the structural whole measures and centrality measures. And so this is the first table I want to show you. This shows how, like, over time, period 1, 2, 3, how the degree centrality measures change for different types of organizations that are included here. So the significant funding here is that Aimei, the incubator, as a foundational or creator of organization in this network, was able to reap considerable network benefit, and they emerged as one of the top organizations that was central and also bridging structural holes. And also, if you look at the type of events that are included in this network, we find there are collaborations between government agencies, there are collaborations between NGOs and businesses, there are collaborations that bring together actors from multiple sectors, there are educational events that provide trainings. Sometimes that's like NGO provide training to other NGOs. Sometimes that's NGO provide training for the Chinese government officials on specific social issues. And then there are several engagement events. So we basically conclude that Aimei was also able to provide a valuable platform for Chinese NGOs and other social actors to collaborate and bridge structural holes that way. And then we run some models. I'm not going to go into a lot of details here. What we find was that for Chinese government, in terms of what types of organizations are more likely to be favored in this kind of networks, we find that if you are a Chinese NGO, you would really work hard to build connections with other groups of organizations. And if you are Chinese business, you also have this very high likelihood to become more and more central over time. So basically, we conclude that our result highlights the importance of Chinese business in the development of Chinese NGOs, because if you look at the models over time, other than Chinese NGOs, Chinese business would be the only other category that is, significantly more likely to have an increase in Thai centrality over time. So, and also at the community level, our analysis also reviewed a structural tendency of disjuncturing. So over the 6-year period of time, the analysis consistently identified healthily connected communities that are that resisted the inclusion of new actors. So what that means is, so Aimei was able to give birth to over 200 Chinese NGOs and bring a lot of business and government agencies together into the fold. But one thing we observed is that these NGOs and businesses and government agencies, they like to form little clusters. Like, so if they create this little cluster within this larger ego network, those clusters tend to stay together. So if I have worked with Adam and Alvin before, the 3 of us would continue to work together, and we would not work with other people in this network. So that's where we see, you know, as being a problem in this type of network. But at the same time, it also suggests, you know, by looking at this NGO's network this way, it showed the strengths of this NGO's work and also showed what are the things that you can further improve. So network not only help you to demonstrate the effectiveness, but it can also diagnose what are the problems that you can further work on. So the key takeaways here is that our findings highlight the unique network building value of NGO incubator as a type of NGOs designed to function as relationship brokers. In the paper, we actually argue that not only this type of practice is desirable in China, it should also be highly recommended for NGOs in many other countries as well. So maybe there should be a category of NGO and their solo job is to help build networks, because networks is so important for civil society. It shouldn't be left for some NGOs to, you know, to do it at their spare time. If you look at, for instance, Schumante's work, they suggest that the generalist NGOs should be the one that help to bridge network. But generalist NGOs such as UN or, you know, some other high-profile NGOs, they have other things to do, right? What if they got very busy with their other work and they forgot to maintain their network? There should be a category of NGOs that specialize in building networks. And these kind of NGOs can really strengthen civil societies, especially in countries where civil society sector is very weak. So that's one of our arguments. And we would also argue here is that when we apply theories such as structural whole theory to the civil society context, a self-interest driven model as outlined in the original theory may be very much insufficient because the assumption is all wrong. When you look at the civil society actors, a lot of times it's not just about my own survival. It's about the strengthening of the entire community. It's about the benefit of the, you know, civil society sector. So if that's the case, maybe we need to broaden up and consider other type of indicator as a benefit of social capital, not just your own, you know, strengths. So if you look at a lot of studies that apply structural whole theory, oftentimes the outcome variable is the company's competitiveness, the profit, or the company's, you know, level of knowledge. Those are the things that's all about yourself. But what if we apply this to civil society? The argument here is that the benefit, the outcome indicators should be the whole, the entire community's strengths, the entire community's benefit, not just about your own organization itself. That is the key takeaway here. And so far I was talking about a very sort of intuitive extension of social network perspective to think about it as a form of social capital. So social capital as social network or network translate into social capital. Those are very intuitive understandings. Many people already kind of like familiar with. So in my next study, what I want to talk about is to kind of like broaden that a little bit and bring some other consideration to think about, okay, you wanted to build your network, but you also want to engage people in, you know, your own social issues, and you want to promote your the health of your issues management. how do you balance out those two different perspectives? Are they related to each other? Can one thing influence the other? What's the relationship here? So in this next part, I want to talk about an essay that provide a theoretical framework that look at how NGOs issue management is related to their network and related to the organization's identity and ideologies. So when we talk about social issues, here I adopt a public relations approach to think of social issues as problems that can affect a group of stakeholders in a given society. And we know that, yes?
Can I slow you down for a second? Can you try to lecture less about your research and integrate this with our listeners a little bit more, because you're doing a nice job of covering your studies and your research, but it will be helpful, I think, if you could sort of ask some questions about it.
Okay, so should I stop here and ask a question?
Well, you know, got key takeaways. Maybe after your key takeaways would be a good spot.
All right, so sorry. This is really my tendency. I got too excited about my own research. So what do you guys think? Any comments?
I think it's really interesting that there's a NGO that was dedicated to do relationship building in China, but it's not really related to the network study that we are discussing here, but who is supporting the Aimei company? Why will there be a network, an NGO that was dedicated to relationship building? Like, who is sponsoring that? I'm just curious.
So this is actually like, Aimei is one example of NGO incubators. So there's actually a pack of NGO like this. Aimei is the largest and sort of longest running one, according to themselves. So I found that information on the website. So when it was at first, Aimei was funded by a number of different organizations. One of those is Shanghai government. So the Shanghai government have some problems in terms of child care and disability care and that sort of issues. And the government is not fully equipped or capable of providing all the full range of services. So they are looking for some kind of civil actors to step in and collaborate. And at the same time, I think it's Ford Foundation. At that time, it was still okay for a foreign foundation to provide funding, and a few other Chinese business-based foundations that have this kind of seed money. And the NGO's funder, he's actually a person with a PhD or something from the US. So he went back to China and he saw this and he think it's a really good opportunity. And I don't know if he ever took a class in social network analysis, but he actually see the value of creating an NGO. Its solo job is to help other NGOs to get, connections, because he think one of the biggest problem. So in the article we included an interview that he conducted with a journalist. So he was talking about why he thought of creating an NGO that's purely dedicated to relationship building. And he was saying that he think in Chinese civil society, it's not about like you don't have money. It's not about you don't have social problem. It's about the money doesn't know who to give to, right? And people don't have enough trust to find, the next collaboration partner. So they wanted to create an NGO whose job it is to help, the foundations to find good NGO to fund, and the good NGOs to find the right kind of partners to collaborate. And he didn't quite put network on it, but it's a network problem, right? So he was visionary enough to come up with this idea, and it was, a really great success. And as basically our network study was able to show that he was able to weave together a very complex network that bring together sectors, multiple sectors from different sections of the society and come together and create some really valuable social goods. So the type of NGOs that they help to fund, some are education-based. They provide education for left home villagers, children who are left behind by the parents in the remote villages to go to school and have school supplies. Some of those NGOs were able to provide, environmental services. So there's a range of NGOs that they help to help. Of course, those NGOs have to be sort of legal in China, so you should not have a human rights NGO out there doing anything. That's not good. But other than that, there's some other social issues they help to address.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions?
May I ask a question?
Yes.
In your research, you always talk about NGOs that are registered nonprofit organizations. I was wondering if there is, in your point of view, what is the difference between NGOs and activist groups that are not necessarily registered and formal? Do you think that all these arguments, especially in your second research, that you're talking about the influence of life cycle of issues on NGOs' identity, ideology, and ultimately their network structure. And do you think that all these arguments are also true for activist groups that are not necessarily registered?
Yes, definitely. So the difference between an activist group and NGO is the level to which they are institutionalized, or they have a formal institutional structure, right? So if you have an activist group, when it was still like a group of people coming together, they may not have a formalized organizational structure. They probably don't have like a formalized fundraising channel. They don't have somebody who's dedicated as a staffer or things like that. They may be like a Facebook group based kind of activist group. So they're less sort of institutionalized versus the NGO have a little bit of more like structure, and they have a registered identity, like an organizational identity, and they probably have like some formal organizational channels to help them fundraise, and they have dedicated staffer who can manage the organization's operation. So that's mostly a structural level kind, like organizational structure difference. But sometimes whether or not you are allowed to be an activist group or NGO depends on the society, the political opportunity that you have. So in some countries, such as the United States, you can be an activist group, and as time goes by, you can turn into an NGO. One example would be the Sunrise Movement. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with this organization. So it started off as a very small scale activist group from California, and they are basically, growing so fast to the degree where now they have become a large NGO with different sort of branches in every state. So that would be a perfect example of how like an activist group can fastly grow into an NGO and have a real impact. So some of the policy you probably have heard that come out of this activist group, things like the Green New Deal. I'm studying that, by the way. So that would be a perfect example of how like an activist group can turn into an NGO, and they have their arguments and things like that. So the next study I was going to talk about, the issue niche theory, that basically apply a lot of the assumptions and the hypothesis really apply to not only just activist group but also NGO. So it's like both applicable in that case.
Thank you.
Do we want to transition to the last part, Aimei?
Okay. So how much time do I have left?
I think we have 15 minutes left total.
About 15 minutes.
Oh, 15 minutes?
Correct, 1-5.
Well, we have for the entire time.
Okay, so maybe I don't have a lot of time to cover this in details because I want to give time to Adam. So I will just quickly talk about this. So the framework is again about like civil society, and the key sort of point here is that NGOs oftentimes needs to engage in issues management. And so when we look at issues, okay, here's what I want to stop here. So when we look at issues, they are not sort of, one entity. They're oftentimes evolving. And the whole point of how like network can make a difference in issues development is the idea that if you have the right kind of network that help your issue to quickly escalate into the next stage, versus if you don't have the right kind of network, maybe your issue will stall and it will never get you to the next point. And I will quickly come to this part. So basically the theory argues that in the center, you have different social issues. Some of the issues are large and they can support a lot of NGOs. Some of those issues are relatively small and they can only support a small group of NGOs. So, and also your issue would affect the kind of organizational identity you have. So for instance, some organizations, here by organization, I mean NGOs. So NGOs oftentimes draw the identity from the issues that they manage. For instance, the Greenpeace would be an example. They draw the organizational identity from the environmental issue, and PETA would be another example. They draw their identity from the animal rights issue. And organizational ideology is basically referring to the sort of ideological framework the organization is operating from. And so all those, what I was arguing in this is that organizations have different identities, and that will determine what kind of relationship they are more likely to build. So if you are a generalist with very general identity, you're more likely to build very diverse kind of relationship, versus if you are a specialist, you're more likely to build relationship with other specialists or less diverse group of organizations. And at the same time, your organization's ideology is going to kind of like affect if you're going to have competitive relationship or if you're going to have collaborative relationships. And those are going to affect the kind of resources that are going to be available to you. Going too fast? And so, and that's where it will fit into the kind of your strategic network building effort. And your network building effort will come back to affect the type of issue development stage that you could have. So oftentimes when you think about your issues management, it shouldn't be divorced from the kind of relationship networks that you try to build. And the key takeaway is that the complexity of network management and relationship management with other key public relations practice, such as issues management, should be considered together. So they shouldn't be like isolated. And that's where, again, that's my earlier point of how like strategic network management should be a paradigm. It's a paradigm change to encourage us to rethink a set of other public relations theories. So in this case, that would be, challenge us to rethink about relationship management and issues management. So it's no longer just about the issue that you are handling. Network can play a role in, issues management, and the list may go on. So for instance, if you are studying corporate social responsibility, or if you're studying something like crisis management, network could also play a role. So that kind of like draw to the point where the strategic network management is a new paradigm that can lay the foundation of a brand new field of research and practice. I would conclude right there and give it over back to Adam.
All right, do you want to stop sharing your screen?
Okay, yeah, sure.
You got about 10 minutes, Adam, maybe 12 or 13 if people want to stick around.
Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to share the screen, but Aimei has to stop sharing it.
How do I stop sharing it?
Zoom.
Okay.
Okay. So one of the things that Aimei was talking on that I'm just going to touch on briefly, and then we'll conclude with questions about how network research can move public relations research forward. Hopefully you all can see my screen now. Can you see the personal networks?
Yes.
Yes.
Right. So just quickly, one of the big limitations of how we've been using network research in public relations is it's either looked at interorganizational relationships or it's looked at social media networks. So we've been looking at how Twitter discussions take on different network structures and have some kind of implication. The problem with this, whenever we're looking at interorganizational relationships or whenever we're looking at social media discussions, we're not actually getting at personal networks. And the reason why I think personal networks are important for us to start considering as public relations researchers is that the ways that we can start to define publics can be captured with this measurement, with egocentric measurement. So we all know that a public is a group of people who have some shared problem, right? They recognize the shared problem and they have some connection to each other. But the ways in which we have measured and studied publics, we haven't actually looked at their connections. So an egocentric network approach shifts the focus from the interorganizational level and away from looking at all of the actors in a network to looking at specifically each individual social network to see how their social network is influencing their behaviors. So just quickly, one of the things that to help you apply this new approach, this egocentric approach, is to think about who you turn to whenever you have questions about public relations research, right? Whenever I have questions about public relations research, I usually talk to Aimei, I talk to Dr. Taylor, or I'll talk to Eric and Dr. Kent. Now, whenever I'm looking at the people that I'm turning to for that problem, or the issues that I'm having, is they all know each other, right? They all have connections to each other. So the network approach here, by focusing on my individual network, we can see that the information that's being exchanged from people who I'm turning to ask questions about my research projects, if they all know each other, they're probably sharing information. And so I'm probably getting a lot of redundant information. Whereas whenever I turn and activate a different tie to somebody who's not connected to this group of people from Oklahoma, then I get access to new information. So what Aimei and I have done is we have looked at who are the people that individuals turn to whenever they were having conversations about the refugee crisis. And we were able to show that those individuals were activating particular ties, right? And so those ties give them access to information. And that's known as the information flow assumption of network research. But what we did is we took a unique approach and we started to look at how individuals' networks are influences, or are sources of influence, not information flow. So we didn't care about how people were accessing information. What we were interested in is to see who were the people that were having the most influence just based on their association. So this new network research approach of focusing on personal networks, I think is really exciting and is a way for us to start to focus more at the individual level. And so I was going to go into more detail, but I just wanted to throw that out there because we did set up at the beginning that we were going to talk about sociocentric approaches, which Aimei covered, and then personal or egocentric approaches is what I was going to cover there. So just some things that you might want to think about with the personal network approaches is in your own research, you might want to start to consider who individuals are turning to whenever they're having conversations about a topic that's of interest to you. So I know that Bree had to leave, but in her example of looking at people's discussions about the mining issue, whenever people are activating those ties, that is going to have an influence on their behavior. And the reason why I think for public relations in particular that it's helpful for us to start focusing on this is that it allows us to capture the social environment in which people are embedded in, right? We know that whenever people are receiving our messages or they're getting multiple messages from different sources, that they're having conversations about that, or that they might not talk about our specific message that comes from one organization or from an organization. They might hear about it from other people. And so I think for us to really accurately understand how issues are evolving and how issues are influencing organizations, we need to start to focus more on individuals and who they're turning to whenever they're having discussions that are relative to organizations, activists, or even more broadly, societal level issues. So with that, what I thought we could do in the last 5 minutes is just consider, 3 big questions. Like, what is the role of public relations in networks? What does network perspective provide for public relations theory and research? Or in what ways do you see network research moving your research or the field's research forward? So maybe we could start with the first one now that we've quickly gone over the network perspective. What role does public relations play in networks?
I can go ahead and I think the perspective and the paradigm that Aimei offers, strategic network management, I think it's a great perspective to look at how public relations can help and play in networks, strategically building those relationships, breaking holes, pushing resources, building connections, building trust, expanding, narrowing. I mean, we can manage the network in that sense, and I think it's a great paradigm and great perspective to look at it. And from there, but I don't like to look at public relations only from the organization's perspective in that sense. I think it's also great to look at it from the public relations perspective, in the sense that everyone is a little bit a public relations practitioner, because what we do sometimes for a reason, sometimes without any reason, but anything we do, we still exist in a society. So we still build those networks, and understanding this, I think, like communication and public relations, that the fact that we try to understand this, try to capture this, and try to study this, I think we can contribute a lot to understanding of the society and the environment and the communities we live in.
Yeah, exactly. I think that for us to really understand what public relations role is in society in general, is that we have to understand what ways public relations is influencing individual level networks, organizational macro level networks, and then societal networks. So that's, yeah, I think that's great, Anna. Others, what are some other ways that public relations, or excuse me, what other ways or roles can public relations play in networks?
I think I'm thinking of 2 points. First, what Aimei said, for example, in the structural whole theory, Bert is discussing about organizational or individual benefit, but in public relations, we are also interested in facilitating civil society and benefiting the whole network, the whole actors in the network. And also, I think the rhetorical focus, the rhetorical theories in public relations can contribute to the network theory, because it can explain how networks can be developed through rhetoric. For example, identification.
Yeah. So, Cheongh, do you have anything I haven't heard from you? Yeah.
Cheongh? I think she left.
Okay. All right, maybe we could just, in the last couple of minutes that we have, in what ways do you see network research moving your research or the field's research forward?
I think just as like in the special issue, I said that most of the network research in public relations focused on interorganizational relationships, and I think it's there will be a more potential that we look at, just as Adam said, about the relationship networks among publics and between publics, how they can act.
Oh, hi.
Hi, Cheongh.
Sorry, I didn't laugh. It was just my microphone didn't work.
Oh.
So, sorry. Can I say something?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, sorry to interrupt you, Evan.
No, you got.
So in my research, I think the most important thing is how to configure the ties and make it to be more relevant to communication actions, and also how to differentiate different types of nodes and make sure the nodes represent some communication meanings instead of just saying, hey, this is a nonprofit, that is a corporation. So make the stakeholder conceptualize stakeholder in a more communication, meaningful way. Yes.
Yeah, great. Alvin, do you want to?
Oh, yeah. I was talking about also Adam mentioned that like I think I agree with Adam that public relations is basically we're studying 3 levels of relationship networks. The first one is the societal level, and the second is organizational, and the third is the individual level. And I think a lot of the existing research focused on interorganizational relationships networks, and there could be a way forward that we're studying at societal level and the public level that different individuals, their networks can influence the organizations in some way, and I think it's underdeveloped, and that could be a way forward that relationship network perspective can inform public relations research.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm that annoying professor at the door trying to get into the classroom with my, excuse me, I have this room. So we're gonna have to wrap this up. I thank you all for coming. Adam, you wanna have any last comments?
No, I was just gonna say thank you for organizing this, Michael. Appreciate you putting this together. I think it's exciting.
Yeah, thank you so much. We really enjoyed it.
We went from 7 to 14, so hopefully 28 next time.
Yeah. That'd be great.
All right, I'm gonna stop the recording and shut this down. Thank you for coming, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you. For most of you.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thank you.